The air in the maintenance bay was a permanent mixture of smells. Hot metal, stale oil, the sharp tang of ozone from plasma cutters, and underneath it all, the faint, recycled scent of the air scrubbers working too hard. It was a smell Jinhuan knew as well as his own name. He wiped his hands on a dark gray cloth, the fabric stained with years of grime, and looked at the open panel in front of him. He was in the belly of the Starlight Sonata, a luxury personal yacht that belonged to some wealthy business figure from off-world. The ship was a beautiful thing on the outside, with sweeping draconian lines that looked like a bird in flight. Inside the bay, however, it was just another maze of wires, conduits, and access panels. Jinhuan's focus was on a particular junction, buried deep behind the crew's kitchen area. For weeks, the Sonata had a problem. In flight, the artificial gravity would get a little soft, a little wobbly, for just a second. Like the floor was sighing. It wasn't dangerous, but on a ship where the owner paid for absolute perfection, it was a big mark of shame. The draconian mastertechs had looked at it. They had replaced the main gravity generator twice. They had scanned every primary system. They found nothing. The problem was labeled a phantom issue, and the ship was sent down to the underlevels, to the human-staffed bay, for a final look before it was to be sold. Jinhuan had gotten the job. He didn't start with the gravity systems. He started with the ship's log, reading every service note for the past 10 years. He saw a note about a kitchen refit. A new, high-powered food preservation unit had been installed. The unit was not draconian. It was a powerful human-made model, cheaper and more efficient. It had been put in by a subcontractor. While the mastertechs looked up at the grand systems, Jinhuan looked around. He traced power lines. He listened to the hum of the ship with a mechanic stethoscope, a simple tool others laughed at. He found it. The new preservation unit, when it kicked on its high-power cycle, drew a huge burst of energy. That draw created a tiny, brief fluctuation in the local power grid. That fluctuation was next to a secondary inertial damper, a device that helped smooth out the gravity. The damper was sensitive. The power surge made it hiccup. One tiny hiccup, once every few days, translated to that soft sigh in the gravity on the deck above. The fix wasn't hard. He didn't need a new generator. He simply installed a small power flow regulator between the kitchen unit and the ship's grid. A buffer. Cost very little. It took him an afternoon to make the part and put it in. He then wrote a report. It was clear. It had steps. Step 1, noted symptom. Step 2, checked ship history. Step 3, found unrelated upgrade. Step 4, identified interference pattern. Step 5, applied targeted buffer. Conclusion, problem solved at its root cause. Manager Day walked over, his tablet in hand. He was a tired-looking man, always worried. The big boss is doing a spot check today. Is the Sonata ready? It needs to be gone. It's ready, Jinhuan said, closing the access panel with a soft click. The gravity fault is fixed. Day scanned the report on his own screen. He frowned. A kitchen unit? You spent 3 days fixing a gravity problem in the kitchen? The report says you made a custom part. The problem started in the kitchen, Jinhuan explained, his voice calm. The part just tells the two systems how to talk to each other without arguing. Day shook his head, a nervous gesture. Lady Yuna won't care about the kitchen. She'll see time spent, not a problem solved. And you implying a draconian design can be messed up by a food unit. He let the sentence hang. It was a dangerous idea. Before Jinhuan could answer, the atmosphere of the bay changed. The usual clangs and chatter dropped away. Everyone stood a little straighter. Through the main doors, Lady Yuna entered. She was breathtaking and intimidating. Tall, with smooth, pearl-white scales that glittered under the bay lights. She wore simple, elegant clothes that probably cost more than the bay made in a year. 200 years old, they said. Her eyes, a deep gold, swept over the bay, missing nothing. She moved with a slow, sure grace, coming to a stop before the Starlight Sonata. Manager Day rushed forward, bowing. Lady Yuna, an honor. The Sonata is complete and ready for final inspection. Her eyes went to Jinhuan, standing by his tool cart. This is the technician who handled the fault? Yes, my lady. Jean Huan. One of our best. Day said, his voice tight. She took Day's tablet, her sharp nail tapping the screen. She read Jean Huan's report in seconds. Her expression, already cool, turned to frost. 3 days, she said, her voice a low, resonant sound that filled the quiet bay. To trace a gravity fault to a refrigerator. She said the word like it was dirt. You replaced no major components. You built a crude regulator. She looked up from the tablet and directly at Jean Huan. My ships are works of art. Their systems are pure. They do not have arguments started by human appliances. Jean Huan met her gaze. He did not look down. The fault is gone, ma'am. It won't come back. I fixed the story, not just the symptom. His words hung in the air. The other mechanics held their breath. To suggest a draconian ship had a story of faults was to suggest it was flawed, imperfect. It was the worst thing he could have said. Lady Yuna's pupils narrowed to thin slits. A story? This is engineering, not a fairy tale. Your method is wasteful. Your thinking is small. You are obsessed with insignificant ghosts in the machine. She drew herself up, the scales on her neck rising slightly. You are fired. Collect your things and leave my facility. Now. She handed the tablet back to a pale manager Day and turned, her long tail sweeping a clean arc on the oily floor as she walked away. The dismissal was total. The bay was silent except for the distant hum of machinery. All eyes were on Jean Huan. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply gave a small, slow nod. He picked up his personal toolbox, a worn case with a simple lock. Then he walked to the Sonata's main access port, opened a small panel, and carefully unplugged a small, silvery data module he had installed there. He slipped it into his pocket. He walked to Manager Day and held out his company badge. Day took it, confused. The physical fix is in place, Jean Huan said, his voice still calm, almost quiet. But the narrative of the fault, the translation file that lets the systems understand each other, is in this module. Without it, the story will repeat itself. In about 6 weeks. Good luck. Then he turned, toolbox in hand, and walked out of the bay. He did not look back at the beautiful ship, or his former co-workers, or the wealthy dragon woman who thought she had just ended his career. He just stepped out into the gritty, busy hallway of the underlevels, the door sliding shut behind him, cutting off the silent, staring world inside. The noise of the main transit corridor hit Jean Huan like a wave. After the tense silence of the bay, the shouts of vendors, the rumble of cargo loaders, and the buzz of 1,000 conversations were almost a relief. He walked without hurry, the weight of his toolbox a familiar comfort in his hand. He did not go home. He turned down a narrower side street, where the lights were dimmer and the air smelled of fried food and engine exhaust. His destination was a small stall tucked between a recycling depot and a plumbing supplier. A faded sign read Sumin's Noodles in cheerful, hand-painted letters. The woman behind the counter was his age, with her hair tied back and a smudge of sauce on her cheek. She looked up as he approached, her friendly smile fading into a look of confusion. Jean Huan? It's the middle of the shift. What are you? Her eyes went to the toolbox, his personal one, not the company issue kit. Her face fell. No. What happened? Lady Yuna came for an inspection, he said, sitting on a worn stool at the small counter. Sumin put down her ladle. And I'm fired. For a second, Sumin just stared. Then her expression shifted from shock to hot anger. You're what? On what grounds? You're the best they have down there. Day knows it. Everyone knows it. Jean Huan explained it simply. The Starlight Sonata, the kitchen unit, the regulator, the report. He told her what he had said about the story of the fault and what Lady Yuna had said about ghosts in the machine. Sumin listened, her hands on her hips. When he finished, she let out a sharp breath. So you fixed it, and she fired you for how you fixed it? Sumin shook her head, grabbing a bowl and filling it with broth and noodles from a large pot. She slid it in front of him. Eat. You need it. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Her pride got pinched because a human found a flaw her fancy techs missed. It wasn't a flaw in their design, Jinhuan said, picking up his chopsticks. It was a flaw in the story. Someone added a chapter that didn't fit. I just edited it. Sumin gave him a look. You and your stories. Try explaining that to a 2-century-old dragon who thinks her ships sing perfect songs. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. What will you do? You can't just... I've got some savings. And you can work here. I need someone to fix the cooler unit again. Anyway, Jinhuan felt a real smile touch his lips for the first time since the firing. Sumin's anger on his behalf was better than any sympathy. Thank you, but I'll be okay. There's always work for someone who can listen to a machine. He ate his noodles. They were good, simple, and warm. As he ate, his mind was not on his lost job. It was on the silvery data module in his pocket. He thought about the 2 systems on the Sonata, the proud, ancient draconian gravity damper, and the loud, efficient human kitchen unit. They were neighbors who didn't speak the same language. His little module was just a translator. Without it, they were back to shouting at each other, causing chaos neither one intended. Back in the gleaming high-floor office of Yuna Engineering, Manager Day was sweating. Lady Yuna stood by the vast window, looking out over the city spires. The Sonata is prepped for delivery to the new owner? She asked, not turning around. Yes, my lady. Fully inspected. The human's physical fix is still in place. All readings are perfect. Good. Sell it. I do not want to see that ship in my bays again. And ensure the new hire for the underlevel is someone who understands our methods. We fix what is broken. We do not go hunting for imaginary narratives. Her tone was final. The incident with the mechanic was already a closed matter. A minor irritation smoothed over. Day bowed and left. He gave the final command. The Starlight Sonata was towed from the bay, gleaming and perfect, to a private launch pad. Its new owner, a trade executive, did a quick walkthrough, impressed by its beauty. He signed the papers. A few hours later, the ship lifted off, sliding smoothly into the dark sky above the city, heading for the jump point that would start its long journey on board. Everything worked. The gravity was solid and even. The kitchen unit hummed, keeping food perfectly preserved. For now. But in the wiring, a silent process had begun. The damper system sent out its steady status pulse, a complex code written in draconian engineering language. The kitchen unit's power manager responded with its own all-clear signal, a simpler human commercial code. They could not understand each other. Without Jinhuan's translator module, the damper began to interpret the kitchen unit's simple signal as a potential error, a foreign bit of noise. It started a low-level diagnostic cycle each time it heard it, trying to decode a message that wasn't for it. The kitchen unit, feeling the tiny power draw of this unfamiliar diagnostic, would adjust its own output slightly to compensate. It was a slow, polite, but utterly confusing conversation between 2 strangers. It was not a problem yet. It was just a misunderstanding. But with every cycle of the kitchen unit, the misunderstanding grew a little deeper, the damper's confusion a little more ingrained. The countdown Jinhuan had mentioned had begun. Not with a bang, but with a whisper of wrong data. Jinhuan finished his noodles and paid Sumin, despite her protests. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. Maybe I'll look at that cooler. He walked to his small apartment, a single room in a block full of other workers. He placed his toolbox on the table. He took the data module from his pocket and set it next to the toolbox. It sat there, small and silent, holding a story that no one else knew was still being written. He looked at it, then out his small window at the neon signs of the underlevels. He felt no anger, only a quiet certainty. The story wasn't over. It was just waiting for its next chapter to be read. The next week passed slowly for Jinhuan. It was a strange feeling. For the first time in years, his mornings were not ruled by the shift bell at Yuna Engineering. The first day, he cleaned his small apartment thoroughly. He organized his tools, not just the ones in his box, but the special ones he kept on shelves, custom calibrators, handmade probes, a beat-up diagnostic pad he had rebuilt himself. On the second day, he went to see Sumin. Her cooler unit was an old model, its motor groaning and leaking cold air. The problem was simple: worn seals and a tired power coupling. But instead of just replacing the parts, Jin Huan took the time to realign the whole assembly. He adjusted the mounting frame so the motor didn't vibrate. He cleaned the dust from the heat vents. When he was done, the unit didn't just work. It ran with a quiet, content hum it hadn't made in years. "Did you give it a story too?" Sumin asked, wiping down her counter with a smile. "I just let it breathe properly," he said. "It was trying to tell me it was suffocating. I listened." She paid him with a hot meal and some credits. Word began to move, but slowly. In the underlevels, trust was earned, not given. A man fired by Lady Una herself was either a troublemaker or a fool, people thought. His first real job came on the fourth day. A delivery driver, a man named Biam, found him at Sumin's stall. His speeder's lift fan was failing. It would shudder and drop a few inches every few miles. He had been to 3 mechanics. They had replaced the fan, the controller, the power cell. The problem remained. He was desperate. Jin Huan looked at the speeder, an old model covered in dents and stickers. He didn't open the tool panel right away. He asked Biam questions. Not just about the fan. About the speeder's history. Had it been in a crash? Had any other work been done? Biam remembered that 6 months ago, he had replaced a damaged thruster nozzle on the left side himself. With a part from a different model of speeder, Jin Huan nodded. He got under the speeder. He looked at the new nozzle. It was almost the same as the original, but the mounting angle was off by a few degrees. This misalignment created a slight, constant twist in the vehicle's frame when the thrusters were active. That twist put a subtle strain on the main lift fan housing, making the bearings wear out faster than they should. He didn't replace the fan again. He realigned the thruster nozzle using a few small spacers to correct the angle. Then he replaced the worn bearings in the original fan housing. The job took half a day and cost Biam a fraction of what the new fan had cost. When Biam took the speeder for a test flight, it rose smoothly without a single shudder. He landed, his face wide with disbelief. How did you even think to look there? Everything is connected," Jin Huan said, wiping his hands. "The thruster told a story about a crash. The frame told a story about constant strain. I just followed the plot." Biam paid him well and promised to tell others. The jobs started to trickle in. A broken water reclaimer in a nearby housing block. A faulty security door that no one could fix. In each case, Jin Huan looked past the obvious broken part. He asked questions. He looked for the history, the cause, not just the symptom. His solutions were often simple, elegant, and cheap. He was not just fixing things. He was healing them. Meanwhile, far from the underlevels, the Starlight Sonata was on its maiden voyage for its new owner. The trade executive, a man named Mr. Park, was hosting a small party for his associates. The ship was beautiful, a testament to draconian art. Everyone was impressed. In the kitchen, a steward prepared refreshments. He used the high-powered preservation unit to quickly chill a bottle of wine. The unit cycled on, drawing its large burst of power. In the wall, the inertial damper sensed the strange power signal it didn't understand. This programming, confused by weeks of these meaningless messages, initiated a more aggressive diagnostic this time. It tried to temporarily isolate that section of the power grid to clean the signal. This isolation caused a tiny, almost undetectable drop in power to the nearby environmental circulator. The circulator, in response, sped up its fan for a second to compensate. The change in fan speed created a subsonic vibration, a low hum that traveled through the ship's structure. On the main deck, where Mr. Park and his guests stood with their drinks, the gravity didn't waver. But the subsonic vibration from the circulator interacted with the precise field of the artificial gravity. It didn't break it. It bent it just a little. To the humans on the deck, the effect was sudden and horrible. A deep, unsettling sense of motion sickness washed over them. The room seemed to tilt, though it didn't. Their stomachs lurched. One guest dropped his glass. Another clutched a chair. his face turning pale. It lasted for 10 seconds. Then it was gone. The ship was perfect again. But the feeling remained. The elegant party was ruined. Mr. Park was embarrassed and angry. He stormed to the bridge. "What was that?" he demanded. The ship's AI, which monitored only major systems, reported all green. The draconian systems showed no faults. The gravity generator was perfect. To the ship's own diagnostics, nothing had happened. But the pale, sick faces of his guests were proof that something had. Mr. Park sent a sharp, private message to Lady Yuna's office. It was not a friendly message. It spoke of a faulty ship, of danger, of a broken trust. It demanded an explanation. Back in the city, Jean Huan was fixing a broken heater for an elderly woman. He found a nest of wiring chewed by a small pest, repaired it, and sealed the access point. The woman thanked him with tears in her eyes. He accepted a cup of tea instead of more credits. He had no way of knowing about the events on the Starlight Sonata. But in his pocket, he still carried that silvery data module. He checked the public maintenance beacon for the ship's registration sometimes, a habit. That evening, he saw a new, encrypted flag on its status, Owner Complaint Systems Anomaly. He looked at the module on his table, then out the window at the rising towers of the wealthy district, lit up against the night sky. The whisper in the machine had become a voice, and soon everyone would have to hear it. The message from Mr. Park landed in Lady Yuna's office like a stone in a still pond. It was not the polite complaint of a disappointed customer. It was a cold, formal notice of a critical habitability failure aboard the Starlight Sonata. It described the event in sharp detail. The sudden, sickening wave of disorientation, the ruined gathering, the fear it had caused. The message ended with a demand for a full investigation and a threat of legal action. Lady Yuna read it once, then again, her golden eyes scanning each word. A deep, slow anger began to burn in her chest. This was not just about a ship. It was about her name. The name Yuna on a hull was a promise of perfection. This sickness was an insult to that promise. She summoned Manager Day immediately. He arrived, looking more nervous than usual. She did not offer him a seat. "The Sonata," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "There is a problem, a severe problem. Explain." Day's mouth was dry. "My lady, the final inspection was perfect. All systems were green. The human's physical fix was in place. We saw no issues. Yet the owner and his guests became ill from a gravity anomaly. An anomaly our perfect systems did not record. How is this possible? I do not know, my lady. Perhaps it is something new. A separate fault." Lady Yuna's tail gave a single, sharp twitch. "Send a team, our best draconian engineers. They are to take the ship apart at the next port if they must. Find this ghost and kill it." The team was dispatched. They were experts, proud and thorough. They met the Starlight Sonata at a starbase. They scanned every primary system. They tested the gravity generator under every condition. They analyzed the environmental systems. They found nothing wrong. Every component met its exact specifications. The ship, according to all their tools and knowledge, was flawless. They sent their report. No systemic fault detected. Event possibly psychosomatic or caused by external spatial phenomena. Lady Yuna read this report with growing fury. She knew it was wrong. Mr. Park was not a foolish man. His guests were not all weak-stomached. The event was real, and her own engineers, with all their skill, could not see it. The ghost the human mechanic had spoken of was laughing at them. Meanwhile, Jean Huan's small reputation was growing. The story of BM's speeder and the elderly woman's heater had spread. People in the underlevels started to seek out the quiet mechanic who asked about history, who fixed the cause and not just the part. He was repairing a faulty airlock for a small cargo dock when Sumin found him. "You need to see this," she said, holding out her personal datapad. Her job in logistics meant she heard things, saw shipping manifests and service bulletins others didn't. On the screen was a fragment of a coded trade chat. It mentioned the Starlight Sonata by name and the word quarantine. Jean Huan read it. He showed no surprise. He finished sealing the airlock gasket before he spoke. The misunderstanding has gotten worse. So it was true, what you told Day, that it would repeat in 6 weeks. It's been 5 weeks and 4 days, Jinhuan said simply. The systems are talking past each other. The confusion is building. It won't be a gravity sigh this time. It will be something else. Something the ship's own brain won't understand because it's looking for a broken arm, not a confused thought. Back in her office, Lady Yuna was at a standstill. Her engineers had failed. The customer was furious. The ship was a floating mystery, a stain on her reputation. Manager Day stood before her, sweating. My lady. There is one possibility, Day said, his voice barely a whisper. Speak. The human, Jinhuan. When he left, he said the narrative was in a module he took. That without it, the story would repeat. Day forced himself to look up. He predicted this. Exactly. Lady Yuna went very still. The memory of that moment in the bay returned. The human's calm face, his quiet words. The narrative of the fault is in this module. Without it, the story will repeat itself. She had thought it was insolence, a final, weak boast. Now it sounded like a prophecy. The idea of calling him back was a bitter taste in her mouth. It was an admission that a human, a fired mechanic from the underlevels, understood something her finest minds did not. But her pride as a businesswoman was stronger than her personal pride. A failing ship was a greater shame. Contact him, she said, the words sharp. Offer him his job back, with a 10% increase. Have him fix the ship and be done with it. Day almost ran to do it. He called Jinhuan on a public channel. He made the offer, trying to sound generous, trying to make it seem like a great opportunity was being given back. On the other end of the line, standing in the noisy cargo dock, Jinhuan listened. He watched a small transport ship land. When Day finished, there was a long silence. No, Jinhuan said. What? Jinhuan, this is a good offer. It's more than you made. I don't want my job back, Jinhuan said. The way I work isn't a mistake. This is how I work. You fired me for it. Taking the job back says it was okay to do that. It wasn't. Day was panicking. What do you want, then? Tell me. I'll look at the ship. As a consultant, my rate is triple my old daily pay. And I speak directly to Lady Yuna. She needs to hear the story. If she agrees, I'll meet the ship at the starbase. When Day reported this to Lady Yuna, she was silent for a full minute. The arrogance of it. The sheer gall. Triple pay. A demand to speak to her directly. Yet he held the answer. He held the narrative. Agree to his terms, she finally said, her voice like ice. But he reports to the bay the moment the ship is fixed. And I will be there. I will hear this story myself. And then we will see. A message was sent. Terms agreed. Jinhuan packed his toolbox. Suman helped him get a spot on a transport heading to the same starbase. Are you sure about this? She asked. Walking back into that lion's den? It's not the same, Jinhuan said. Last time I was an employee she could throw away. This time I'm the one with the key. I just have to make sure she sees the lock. He boarded the transport. As it lifted off from the underlevels, he looked down at the maze of streets and stalls, then up at the distant, shining towers. He was going from one world to another, but he was taking his own world with him in his toolbox and in his mind. The story was waiting. The starbase was a place of clean lines and quiet hums, a world away from the noisy underlevels. Jinhuan's transport docked in a public bay, a cavernous space filled with the echoes of machinery and distant announcements. He carried only his toolbox. He was met not by Manager Day, but by a young Draconian in a junior engineer's uniform. The Draconian looked at Jinhuan's simple clothes and worn toolbox with poorly hidden doubt. You are the specialist? The engineer asked, his tone making the words sound like a joke. I am here to look at the Starlight Sonata, Jinhuan replied, his voice neutral. The engineer led him through a series of gleaming corridors. They entered a private service bay. And there she was. The Starlight Sonata sat under bright lights, beautiful and silent. But the scene around it was not silent. Lady Una stood like a statue to one side, her arms crossed, her scaled face unreadable. Around her stood a group of her senior Draconian engineers, their expressions a mix of curiosity, pride, and resentment. Manager Day hovered nervously behind them. The air was thick with tension. Jean Huan walked in and set his toolbox down on the floor with a soft thud. He did not bow. He simply gave a small nod to Lady Una. "You asked for a consultation." "I asked for a solution," Lady Una corrected, her golden eyes fixed on him. "My engineers have found none." "You claimed to know the narrative. Show me." One of the senior engineers, an older Draconian with dark blue scales, stepped forward. "We have scanned every primary and secondary system. Gravimetric generators, inertial dampers, environmental controls. All are within perfect operational parameters. There is no fault to fix." He said it like a challenge. Jean Huan looked at the engineer, then at the ship. "The fault isn't in a single system. It's in the conversation between two of them. You checked the parts. You didn't listen to the talk." He walked to the main access port, the same one he had used weeks ago. He opened the small panel. The space where his data module had been was empty, just a socket waiting. He took the small, silvery module from his pocket. A murmur went through the Draconian engineers. "A non-standard data buffer?" one whispered. "That is not an approved part." Ignoring them, Jean Huan slid the module into its socket, clicked into place. A tiny green light on its side began to pulse softly. He then walked over to a main diagnostic terminal. The Draconians had left it on, displaying a long, complex list of perfect green numbers. Jean Huan closed their program. He plugged his own beat-up diagnostic pad into the port. On his small screen, a different interface appeared. It was not a list of numbers. It was a simple visual flowchart. It began with a picture of a kitchen unit. A line connected it to a power surge. Another line connected that surge to a confused damper. Then it showed two different speech bubbles, one with complex Draconian code, one with simple human commercial signals. They were crossed with a red X. Then the flowchart showed his small module slotting in between them. The speech bubbles changed, showing a translated, simplified dialogue. The lines turned green. The confusion ended. "This," Jean Huan said, turning the pad so Lady Una and the others could see, "is the story. 6 weeks ago, a kitchen unit was installed. It speaks a different language. Every time it speaks, the damper next door hears noise it can't understand. Tries to fix what isn't broken. That effort causes a ripple. That ripple grew. Last week, the ripple became a wave that made people sick." The senior engineer scoffed. "A children's picture. This is not engineering data. Where are the spectroanalysis reports? The harmonic resonance tables?" Jean Huan looked at him. "The data is in your systems. You have it all. But you were looking for a broken thing. You weren't looking for a misunderstanding." He tapped a few keys on his pad. "Watch the damper's internal log. Not its health but its error diary. The thing it writes down when it's confused." On the main terminal screen, a new window opened. It showed the damper's low-level error log, a file usually ignored. It was filled with thousands of tiny, repeated entries. Unknown signal type power bus 7C. Diagnostic cycle initiated. The timestamps matched exactly with the kitchen unit's power cycle logs. There was a long silence. The engineers stared at the screen. They had never thought to look there. To them, an error log was for failures. This was just chatter. But the correlation was perfect. Lady Una stared at the two screens, the simple flowchart on Jean Huan's pad and the hard data on her terminal. They were telling the same story in two different languages. One she could see in an instant, the other she needed data to confirm. The human's way had found the truth first. "And your module?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "It doesn't fix anything. It just translates. Tells the damper, the noise from next door is okay. It's just the kitchen. Ignore it. And it tells the kitchen unit, don't shout. Speak softly. It lets them be good neighbors." Jean Huan walked back to the diagnostic terminal and pulled up the main system status. For weeks, there had been a faint, unexplained power fluctuation in that section. It was logged as insignificant. Now, as they watched, the fluctuation smoothed out and vanished. The two systems had stopped arguing. He unplugged his pad. The ship is fine now. The story has a better ending. But if you take the module out, the argument starts again. The fix isn't in the metal. It's in the conversation. He looked directly at Lady Una. The bay was utterly still. The proud engineers were no longer looking at him with doubt. They were looking at the screens, at the proof that had been hidden in plain sight, seen not by their advanced tools, but by a man who thought in stories. Lady Una uncrossed her arms. She looked from the healed system data to Jean Huan's calm face. She had expected a trick, a clever hack. Instead, she had been shown a principle, a different way of seeing. The ghost had been real, and this human had not just seen it. He had understood its name. The silence in the bay was heavy. The soft, steady hum of the starbase systems seemed to grow louder, filling the space where words should have been. The draconian engineers stared at the main screen, where the confusing error logs now made a perfect, undeniable pattern. They looked from the screen to the small, silvery module, and then to Jean Huan. Their pride was a wall that had just been cracked. Lady Una did not look at her engineers. Her eyes were fixed on Jean Huan. The anger was gone from her face, replaced by a deep, calculating focus. She was not seeing a mechanic anymore. She was seeing the flowchart he had shown her. The simple lines connecting cause to effect. It was a logic so clear a child could follow it, and yet her finest minds had been blind to it. "You saw this narrative from the beginning," she said. "It was not a question." "I saw two systems that weren't meant to be friends," Jean Huan replied. "I just gave them a way to be polite." One of the senior engineers, the one with dark blue scales, found his voice. "This is a specific compatibility issue, Patch. It does not change fundamental engineering principles." He was trying to save face, to put the discovery back in a small box. Jean Huan turned to him. "How many ships in your fleet have had upgrades? New shields from one maker, new thrusters from another, life support parts from a third, all speaking different languages. How many have phantom issues you can't solve? Issues that come and go?" He paused, letting the question hang. "This isn't about one kitchen unit. It's about the story every ship gathers over time. You build a perfect sentence, but then life adds words. My job is to make sure the new words don't break the grammar." Lady Una took a single step forward. The subtle movement drew everyone's attention. "You said you would not return as an employee. You demanded to speak to me. You have done so. What is it you want?" Jean Huan met her gaze. He was not in the underlevels now. He was on her ground, but he held a new kind of ground in his mind. "You fired me for seeing stories, but the stories are real. They are the history of the machine. Ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It lets them grow into ghosts that haunt you." He gestured to the Starlight Sonata. "Like this one." He took a breath. "I will not sit in the underlevel bay, fixing only what I am told to fix. That method failed. I want to create a new role, a systems narrator. Someone who reads the full history of a ship before work begins. Someone who finds these misunderstandings before they become problems. I would work on the difficult cases, the ones that confuse your engineers. And I would teach my method to anyone who wants to learn, human or draconian." Manager Day's eyes went wide. The engineers exchanged shocked glances. It was an outrageous proposal. A human teaching draconians? A new, unheard-of position? Lady Una did not react with outrage. She tilted her head, a very reptilian gesture of thought. "You wish to be a translator, not for languages but for machines." "Yes," Jean Huan said. "Every part has a voice. I listen, and I make sure they can hear each other." She was silent again, looking past him at her ship. Her perfect, flawed ship. The solution was not a grand new generator or a massive overhaul. It was a tiny module and a different way of thinking. It was elegant. It was cheap. It was, in its own way, beautiful. and it had saved her from a major scandal. Her business mind, sharper than her pride, saw the value. How many other phantom issues across her fleet could be solved this way? How much time and credit was wasted chasing broken parts that were not broken? How many customers could be kept happy? Your title would be Chief of Integrated Systems Analysis, she stated, her voice formal. You will report directly to me. You will have access to all ship logs and service histories. You will work on the cases others cannot solve. You may propose training sessions. She said the last part carefully as if testing the words. Your compensation will be 5 times your previous rate. It was a monumental offer. It was a surrender and an investment at the same time. Jinhuan considered it. He was not being given his old job back. He was being offered a new one that did not exist before. A job built around his way of thinking. He nodded slowly. I accept. On 2 conditions. I choose my own assistant, and my friend Sumin in logistics gets a promotion. She sees the flow of parts and problems. She understands stories too. Lady Yuna almost smiled. It was just a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth. Agreed. She turned to her stunned engineers. The fault on the Starlight Sonata is resolved. Note the solution. A compatibility translation module, applied after narrative analysis of system history. File the report under the new protocol. She had given it a name. Protocol. She had made it official. The engineers understood. The world had just shifted. A little. Lady Yuna looked back at Jinhuan. Begin your analysis on the solar wind tomorrow. It has a thruster imbalance that has defied correction for a year. I will send you the logs. With that, she turned and walked out of the bay, her tail swaying slowly behind her. The meeting was over. The engineers slowly went back to their work, casting long looks at Jinhuan. Manager Day approached, his face a mix of relief and bewilderment. Chief of, I will have your new credentials prepared. Jinhuan picked up his toolbox, felt the same in his hand. But everything else was different. He had not won a fight. He had given a lesson and it had been accepted. He walked out of the private bay, back into the public corridor. He pulled out his simple datapad and sent a short message to Sumin. The story had a good ending. New chapter starts tomorrow. You're getting a promotion. He looked down the long corridor that led back to the transport docks to the underlevels. Then he looked the other way, toward the executive offices and the complex, beautiful ships waiting for their stories to be read. He had a foot in both worlds now. And for the first time, both worlds needed what he saw. Jinhuan returned to the underlevels, but not to stay. His small apartment felt different. It was no longer just a place to rest between shifts. It was a place to think. The next morning, he put on the same work clothes, but he packed a few extra tools. He looked at the data module still on his table, the one that had started it all. He left it there. It was proof of a story that was now over. He walked through the familiar streets. The noise and smells were the same, but people looked at him differently now. Word traveled fast. Biam, the driver, waved from his now perfect speeder. The elderly woman whose heater he'd fixed gave him a bright smile. They had heard. The mechanic who talked to machines had talked to a dragon, and the dragon had listened. He stopped at Sumin's stall. She was already there, her eyes wide with disbelief. A promotion? Jinhuan, what did you do? I told her the truth she already knew, he said simply. The machines were talking, and no one was listening. Now they want me to listen full-time. Sumin shook her head, a huge grin spreading across her face. Chief of Integrated Systems Analysis. It sounds important. And you asked for me? You see how things move. You see a broken part on a manifest and you know a ship will be delayed. That's a kind of story, too. I need someone who understands that. He paused. Do you want it? It'll mean working up in the towers. Sumin looked around at her stall, at the steaming pots and the familiar customers. Then she looked back at him, her expression serious. Yes, I want to hear the rest of the story. Together, they took a transit lift up. Far up, the noisy underlevels gave way to the quiet, wide corridors of the executive sector. The air was cooler here and smelled of nothing at all. Manager Day was waiting for them at the entrance to a new office space. It was small, with a clear window looking into a larger, shared engineering bay. On the door was a simple plate, Integrated Systems Analysis, Jean Huan. Your credentials, Day said, handing him a new badge. It didn't say mechanic. It had his name and his new title. Lady Yuna has already uploaded the first set of logs. The solar wind. Inside the office was a desk, a terminal, and a small table for his toolbox. It was not fancy, but it was his. Sumin's new desk was just outside. In a logistics hub with a proper terminal. Jean Huan sat down. He pulled up the logs for the solar wind. It was a mid-sized cargo hauler with a persistent problem. Its starboard thruster would lose 5% of its power at random intervals. Like the Sonata, it had been through countless repairs. Thrusters replaced, fuel lines flushed, controllers overhauled. The problem remained. He didn't look at the thruster diagnostics first. He pulled the ship's entire service history. He read it like a book. Years of entries. He saw a pattern others had missed. 2 years ago, the ship had been fitted with a new experimental navigation computer. 6 months after that, the thruster problem began. The navigation computer and the thruster control system were made by different companies. They were both draconian, but from different schools of design. They were polite strangers. Jean Huan wrote a simple search program. It wasn't complex. It just compared timestamps. He had it look for moments when the navigation computer made a specific kind of calculation, a long-range course correction. He then compared those exact moments to the thruster power logs. There it was. Every single time the navigation computer did its complex calculation, it used a burst of processing power. That burst created a tiny spike in the shared data bus. The thruster controller, sensing this unfamiliar spike on the line, interpreted it as a potential error signal. Its safety protocol would briefly throttle the thruster power by 5%, just to be safe. A second later, it would restore it. The problem wasn't the thruster. It wasn't the fuel. It was a conversation. The navigation computer was saying, "I am thinking very hard." The thruster controller heard, "Something is wrong," and flinched. The fix was a few lines of code. A filter for the thruster controller, telling it to ignore that specific type of data spike. It took Jean Huan 20 minutes to write and test it. He sent the patch to the Solar Winds engineer with a brief note explaining the cause. An hour later, a response came, not to him, but to Lady Yuna. It was from the Solar Winds captain. Thruster imbalance resolved. Problem eliminated. What was the solution? Lady Yuna forwarded the message to Jean Huan's terminal. Attached was a single line from her. Narrative confirmed. Proceed. He leaned back in his chair. In the bay outside his window, he could see the draconian engineers working. One of them, the young one who had met him at the dock, glanced towards his office. The look was no longer doubtful. It was curious. Sumin came in with 2 cups of tea. "Well, did you find another ghost?" "Just a misunderstanding," he said, accepting the cup. 2 parts that were being too polite. She laughed. It was a good sound in the quiet room. Later that day, Lady Yuna passed by the office. She did not come in. She simply paused at the window and looked inside. Jean Huan was at his terminal, not staring at complex graphs, but reading a list of ship upgrades from years ago. His eyes tracking the story. She watched for a moment, then gave a slow, thoughtful nod and walked on. Jean Huan finished his tea. He saved his work. He had a list of 4 other Phantom issue ships to look at. Each one was a mystery waiting to be read. He wasn't fixing machines anymore. He was translating for them. And in doing so, he was building a new kind of bridge between the gritty truth of the underlevels and the shining ideals of the towers. He picked up his datapad, ready to begin the next story. Outside, the city hummed, full of machines and their secret conversations. And now, someone was finally listening.